Hello and welcome to episode 73 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogan1701. With me is our very own genetically engineered EPO mercenary, Markhawkman.
No.
And his personal houseplant slash muscle, Greendragoon.
Yeah, I've never met this man before today.
And our guest tonight, well, actually this morning for him, please welcome back from the land down under, Bazag.
Surprise! Good morning, everyone. Slash evening for those people who aren't here.
It's people who live in other hemispheres.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think it's midnight in Europe or something.
something like that. We've had some of our European guests have to stay up very late to appear on the roundtable. We're grateful for them for doing that. So nothing really in the way of Foundry news going on this week. However, as in past weeks, we have more info releases and tribble patches for Delta Rising. So we have two big info releases so far this week. We have information on intelligence ships, all their stats and bridge officers and all that kind of thing was released. So if you're a big fan of stats and figuring out whether you want to fly those ships, check that one out. I already bought the pack, so I already know I'm flying them. On actually today was the second very big dev blog, which I have not had a chance to read through just yet. It was on intelligence bridge officers. This is the new hybrid class of bridge officer that we'll be seeing, pretty much exclusively being flown on those intelligence ships, unless they come up with something else that you can use them elsewhere. But of course, I think anybody will be able to have them in their away team, so there will be that. That release on intelligence bridge officers actually is part of why we are here on Starbase 39 today. So, Dragoon, if you want to walk over to our other guest of honor today, Lieutenant Commander Kyle DeSoto. We showcase Commander DeSoto here because he's actually wearing the intelligence variant of the excursion outfit. I say excursion instead of tactical because apparently down on Tribble this has been renamed because I guess people were confused that they thought tactical meant all tactical officers should wear this. So they're changing it to excursion. But in any case...
It's almost like a field uniform.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. But in any case, why we're looking at him is because he's in Starfleet Intelligence, and we heard from Thomas the Cat that about color schemes for Starfleet Intelligence. And essentially it's the same as all of his regular Odyssey uniform variants, just instead of the department color stripe, their stripe is black. So instead of, red, blue, or I say blue-green or yellow, their stripe is black. So I think there's DeSoto here, and then there's another guy on Earth Space Dock has one of the regular duty uniforms on, who is also black. So that is the color scheme. Now, there are some screenshots with the dev blog today that look like some sort of armor or infiltration suit or something cool like that. I will have to say really how that plays out. Of course, we may not get access to it in the Foundry right away, so as far as the Foundry goes, if you got Starfleet Intelligence guys and they need to be wearing uniforms, we can use this color scheme. Just normal, just except for black stripes.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to kind of have an official standard on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how the new uniforms will fit in. Who knows? Maybe they'll include it with the batch of assets they've talked about for Delta Rising.
Oh, we would certainly love to have that. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, or Dragoon came up with to talk about, was what is the nature of Starfleet Intelligence?
Well, I mean, this isn't so much I came up with it, but something I've noticed on the forums is when this whole intelligence ship thing came out, a lot of people immediately started jumping to the concept of Section 31 and how's this the pseudo deep undercover organization that answers to no one, that is basically kind of the embodiment of espionage gone haywire. And that really, I mean, it kind of is a misnomer because these ships are actually a reference to Starfleet Intelligence, not Section 31, and that is a completely different organization. And so I think a lot of people kind of have those two groups mixed up, or the concept behind those two groups. So I thought it'd be worth talking about. I mean, what is Starfleet Intelligence, and what is it they hypothetically do?
Well, in essence, I mean, the best analogy that I've seen is the Office of Naval Intelligence that the United States has,
Which I wouldn't be
which
surprised if
essentially,
it's
yeah,
based on.
which essentially, yeah, because we know that Starfleet is often based on modern militaries, especially navies, as well as British colonial era militaries, especially navies. Now, Odyssey 47 in the chat room says it's the CIA, and that's really not, I would say, true. It combines some elements of the CIA with covert ops and things like that, but it's not an independent agency. It is part of Starfleet, and it's like Starfleet Medical. It's just another branch of Starfleet, whereas the CIA is not another branch of the Navy, but Navy has its own intelligence service, which doesn't go on covert ops, should be said. They're mostly, they're in the information business. They take in information and then get it out to their people, to the rest of the Navy.
So yeah, basically they're the ones that collect all the information so that then the armed forces can then proceed with some idea of what they're going into.
And I talked to one of my coworkers who was in the Navy for a long time, and he basically said that every ship out there has intelligence officers on them. They are Navy. They're not like spies or anything. So they are officers on the ship. They're in the chain of command. Basically, they're down in the CIC, the Combat Information Center, who are. And their job is to essentially tell the captain and keep the captain informed about what's over the horizon, about what threats might be incoming, what he might be sailing towards, and they take in information from variety of sources, satellites, reports from back at headquarters, and get it to the captain. And I think that's kind of similar to what these intelligence officers, in a lore sense, are going to be doing for us.
Well, also, in the TV show, this is something that you often see done by the science officer, because the science officer in the TV show is often associated with the collection and redistribution of information, even though it's not strictly a science function.
And you'll actually notice that, I mean, even from a gameplay standpoint, the new intelligence powers have a certain similarity to science powers. So I think there's a kind of a interesting.
It was sort of, I would say it's sort of inconsistent as to who would be performing those duties in the shows. I mean, sometimes it was, if you're looking at the Enterprise, sometimes it was Data giving this kind of information to the captain. Sometimes it was Worf. Sometimes it was, all kinds of different people. I think probably the closest analogy there is what Worf was supposed to be doing on DS9, Strategic Operations Officer.
There actually was a intelligence officer on board DS9. I think Bashir took over from Worf for a short time while he was away. I can't remember what episode it was, but he was in that position where he saw all these reports, but couldn't tell anyone. There's also a few specific instances of episodes in DS9 where, like O'Brien, mainly O'Brien does Starfleet Intelligence-y stuff, Honor Among Thieves, and there's another one later where he goes back with Ezri Dax.
Oh yeah,
to
in
New
the follow-up
Sydney.
where we meet Ezri's family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of what we saw from Starfleet Intelligence in the show was them recruiting the main characters to do something for them. like Go Undercover or Picard infiltrating the Cardassian thing, which turned out to be a trap.
Which I mean,
or getting reports from them, saying,
yeah,
Starfleet Intelligence has this information on these people.
Because they were often the first to know when there was something suspicious going on on one of the other major factions. So, while I do think they do more covert operations than our naval intelligence does, they still kind of function and fill the same purpose of keeping the ships in the field apprised of the situation, bringing up threats or situations, and very much gathering intelligence. I'm trying to remember the episode with O'Brien infiltrating the Orion Syndicate. What were they actually after? They were trying.
It was
it's been a while.
Honor Among Thieves was the episode. I'm just looking up the episode now.
Because they end up setting it up for. I know it ends with him basically having to.
Because he was going after this Orion Syndicate guy.
Yeah, it was trying to get an informant for Starfleet Intelligence. And basically it led to the guy who wanted to become the informant having to let himself be led into a trap. Because if he didn't, then his family would be, killed by the Syndicate because they thought he would be a traitor.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those interesting things. I mean, it seems like in most cases where we see them, they're still very primarily intelligence gathering, which is actually very different from Section 31, which has a very proactive mandate, where they're actively manipulating situations.
So Section 31 is more the Black Ops, whereas
well, not even that, because
Starfleet
Black Ops is a sanctioned and legitimate thing, and Section 31, they're like a completely rogue organization. They don't answer to anyone. They have no oversight. They supposedly are acting in the Federation's best interest by doing the dirty things that nobody else wants to do. Supposedly, I would question that.
And according to some sources, the existence of Section 31 was actually written into the Federation Charter, except that
they actually said Starfleet Charter, and I was corrected on that by the forum guys. It's actually the Starfleet Charter that they were written into.
Which would make sense why they were around in Enterprise's time then.
Yes, it was the original Starfleet Charter, the before the Federation.
But that section was redacted after it was signed.
Correct. So, I mean, in talking about intelligence, so I've read a lot of Tom Clancy, and he goes very in depth into intelligence agencies, especially the CIA. And I mean, you got to take it with a grain of salt, of course, because it's a fiction thing. But some of it is very much based on reality. And he says there's sort of two kinds of intelligence: signals intelligence, which is overhearing things and capturing, diplomatic cables and, wiretaps and things like that. And you include satellite surveillance in that. And that's part of it. And the other one is human intelligence, which is essentially recruiting agents among your enemies to spy for you. And one of the things I saw on the forums is that somebody said, I don't want paid spies on my ship. So I don't want these intelligence officers. And they said, well, that's not who these people are. These people aren't the ones going out and getting this human intelligence, getting these spies in other areas. They're not going to the Romulans and trying to recruit a Romulan senator to spy for them. These are not the guys that you have on your ship. The guys you have on your ship are getting reports from those spies and telling you about it. And they're getting in all of that signals intelligence and telling you about it.
I think a lot of what intelligence officers do can be described by some of the powers they've got. In the intelligence officers' dead blog, they've got a list of some ground and space powers that I just want to I think it would be good to share. One of my favorites is Insight Chaos. By scrambling the target's neurological inputs, you can force them to fire upon their allies. Any allies they strike will subsequently be confused, thus spreading the chaos. Sight to snipe, sight and snare. Fire a long-distance tagger that will then initiate a sight-to-sight transport, bringing a foe to your location. Because of the sudden and unexpected transport, they will be disorientated for a very short time, but damaging them may break them from this effect. That's a couple of the ground ones. Subnucleonic carrier wave. The ability is capable of removing beneficial effects from nearby foes and playing havoc with their ability cooldowns. The effects of this power are far weaker than those of subnucleonic beam, but it is capable of affecting up to 5 nearby foes. So, from what it seems, intelligence is far more about controlling the battlefield, putting more about putting things more into your control, controlling, reducing the abilities and ability to fight back at you.
I guess another way to put it would be forcing the enemy to fight the battle on your terms rather than letting them dictate the terms of the battle.
Well, here's another really great one. Feign disintegration. Convince the enemy of your untimely demise by simulating the effects of a being vaporized by incoming fire. Similar to the technique employed by Section 31 operative Sloan in Deep Space Nine, Series 7, Episode 16. Masked by this ruse, you'll gain an impenetrable short-duration stealth, increased speed, and an ambush bonus.
So it looks like sort of as far as gameplay-wise go, they are definitely bringing in a lot of sort of covert ops principles and taking some things from the shows that come from Section 31, you might say, inspired by.
Well, I mean, it's so rare that we see anyone from Starfleet Intelligence. They're, in most cases, only mentioned.
Yeah. So let's see. Why don't we move it along? So we've had some more updates on Tribble. We had another round of T5U ships put out for testing, along with several new missions. I've only gotten to the first 2 missions personally. We also have the Delta Alliance reputation track. Was put up there with some interesting new weapons, some new torpedoes and things like that. So more of those cluster mine torpedoes, which would be very interesting. Mm-hmm. And I hear the big, bulky compression phaser rifle from Voyager.
Maybe the one that we only ever saw in Voyager.
Yes, I was kind of like that one actually.
Something that had caught my eye recently is somebody was complaining about one of the set bonuses for one of the sets is apparently a experimental Tantalus field.
Wait,
cause somebody to disappear?
If I remember right, the Tantalus mask, isn't that cloaking device that reduced your visibility range? Or am I thinking of...
The Tantalus field is from the episode Mirror Mirror of TOS, which is the basically the assassination tool that Mirror Kirk used to maintain his control over the Enterprise. It basically could spy on anyone and then kill them with a switch.
Essentially disappeared them. And
I guess I was thinking of something from one of the novels then, because I remember there were some novels based on the TOS Mirror universe, and one of them, they were basically talking about this entire suite of technologies that were based on I think they were made by the same guy who made the Tantalus device. and
Well,
one of them was a kind of cloak.
The Tantalus field in TOS was supposedly discovered by Kirk on an alien planet, and he just kind of took it and made use of it. I don't know what context this particular one is in. Obviously, it's an interesting reference. I don't know how it's going to be used, though, or what did it even do.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. So, Dragoon, do you have your spoiler warning ready?
I do, in fact.
All right.
Spoilers.
All right. Because I do want to talk about some of the things that are on Tribble in context of what we might be getting in the Foundry. And until the Foundry is turned on, we can kind of only speculate about things we might get. And until we're further along, I don't necessarily want to do any wish lists on the show. I mean, we can certainly do things like that down in the Tribble forums, but I want to keep it off the show because there are some people out there who don't want to have themselves spoiled about the plot points. But I do want to keep people informed about some of the things that are likely additions until we can confirm them. And what I want to do is go on a kind of a case-by-case basis to make sure there aren't really huge plot spoilers. And I want to do things that have been revealed in other places, but we can still talk about. So, I think the two things that we're likely to get are ships and combat mobs. There's one type of mob that I think we'll get that I don't want to talk about yet because it's a major unrevealed spoiler. But there are several that I think we can talk about. So the first one is Talaxians. We've had the lore blog on the Talaxians, and we know Ethan Phillips is going to be in the game as Neelix. So I can confirm that he's in one of these missions that I've played. And what is also in this mission is some Talaxian ships. We saw one small ship that looks like Neelix's ship, and then there's another larger freighter. So I think we'll probably get those, maybe as friendly mobs, be very nice, or we'll get them in
just costume creator.
Yeah. I mean, because Talaxians, if I remember correctly, at least most of the Talaxian parts are something that are already in the Alien editor somewhere.
I think some of them, yeah.
I mean, because there are a lot of parts in the Alien editor that have interesting names,
and some
like
of them
how the
already from
Portuguese are named Vented. But if you look at all the pieces, you'll recognize stuff from certain specific races that are not mentioned by name in the costume options.
Yeah, and we've always had things like Ocampa ears as well. And Odyssey 47 says he noticed that we have Trave forehead options in the Foundry. That's not something I've noticed before, but I don't know. I'm always finding new ones in there that I didn't notice.
Probably surprised with slips into the Foundry. Actually, something I noticed about this is because, again, spoiler, one of these missions you see a certain Talaxian colony, which kind of makes sense because that's where Voyager left Neelix, but it's in the wrong place. It's like not even close to where it's supposed to be.
Really?
Well, the episode with them dropping off Neelix was one of the last episodes before the finale. And so it really should be like way down at the bottom.
Way down in the south end, yeah.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. I've actually been going through the new sector block and comparing it to my Starfleet Star Charts map. So I've kind of started to line up some of the stars that they use and stuff like that. And so I can tell you that...
Sir Boulevard is saying that it's not the same colony.
Really?
He says in the mission it says they backtrack towards Talax.
Okay, I must have missed that part.
What's the name of the planet or whatever body that they're on?
Don't remember if there was a name for it.
Yeah, I'd have to go look.
In any case, we're veering more towards the spoilery area, which I wanted to avoid. So back on track, I mean, to the ships themselves. I think those two types of ships, I think we'll either get them in the character creator or as maybe friendly mobs. And then the other ones that I encountered that I wanted to mention were Malon ships. You may remember the Malon as the surly garbage men of the Delta Quadrant hauling around lots of Theta radiation, dumping it wherever they wanted. We did see these in the trailer, so I'm confident not really spoiling anything. But in the mission, one of the missions that's on Tribble, you encounter frigate, cruiser, and battleship types, which kind of share designs reminiscent of the Malon ship on the show, just smaller, bigger, and biggest. And obviously that's a familiar setup, which makes me think they'll definitely be in the Foundry as combat mobs. That's as far as I've gotten on Tribble.
Well, I've done more. We do see some Bentham. So we, I don't know whether I want to say if they're friendly or not, but I do think there will be their NPC mobs as well, frigates, and so on. Same as probably should see Kazon. They'll be definitely a
oh yeah. Well, we
enemy
knew we knew that they were coming.
I really don't want to. Well, that's the Bull Cooperative.
There's some big ones
has
that
been
we don't want to spoil
mentioned.
For people, so
the Bull Cooperative has been mentioned, so we might
see some cooperative ships. Yeah,
might see some cooperative ships as well.
They're a big player in the
well, one thing
the PvEQ thing.
Yeah.
We are allowed to mention all of the races that were brought up in the teaser video, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, one thing that
I don't think we've seen all of them just yet, but
one thing I'm particularly looking forward to is the possibility that they will add the Vadwar to the costume creator, because all of the options used by the Vadwar are stuff we don't have in Foundry right now. One of them, the neck piece that the Vadwar NPCs use, I don't think we have that in the game at all yet.
The question is going to be, I think, what are they going to add to the in-game costume creator? Because if they add it to that, there's more of a chance that we'll get it in the Foundry.
So the general policy, I think, is going to be if it's a costume that the players can use and or customize, it's a pretty good chance to get into the costume creator. If it's a costume that we don't, it's like strictly NPC, then no, it's not going to show up in the costume creator. We might get it as a NPC contact.
Well, and we should remember how it generally works, is that anything that's put into what the player can wear by default, we also get by default. If you can wear it at the beginning of the game, we can have it in the Foundry. Otherwise, they have to actually put in some conscious effort to do it and add it. So, I mean, we may Zero may go through another round of add all the costumes. We really hope she does, especially after Delta Rising. That would be fantastic.
I don't think there's going to be like a ton for her to add. I mean,
that's hard to say.
There's going to be limits to how many costumes they can even generate.
Well, so far it's confirmed one, which is the Talaxian outfit in the Delta Rising pack.
Well, two if we count the Intel uniforms from today's blog.
Well, assuming those are player uniforms.
I'm actually
bridge officer uniforms.
I'm expecting that in some form the Vadwar outfits will be available as well. I mean, it just strikes me as the sort of thing you might get as a low-buy store or a lockbox.
I think we'll probably see some outfits in the low-buy store.
Yeah, there'll probably be one or two in there. I don't think there will be a ton, but I mean, we're talking like 5 or 6 at most.
They're adding a lot of different races, and that's a lot of opportunity to put outfits in the low-buy store or other beans.
But I mean, that's if they make it as a player costume. Player costumes have to be much higher fidelity than NPC costumes. Plus, there's a whole ton of work in getting them set up for the rig.
Absolutely.
NPCs are a little bit simpler.
Might not end up with with all of the options, but you know, maybe at least the cooler looking ones. I mean, like with the Voth. The Voth light soldier outfit is the outfit that the Voth red shirts use. We don't have the outfits that the other Voth use available for characters, but you know.
Well, we
Wait,
have
do we have
the
Voth
reputation
light
armor.
soldier?
We do have their light soldier outfit. It's low by store, and that was put in the Foundry. We also have the armor, which isn't strictly Voth. It's more like a re-engineered hybrid of Voth tech and Solane tech, which kind of looks Voth, which is why I'm using it on my character that's supposed to be a Voth and flying Voth ships. So there's that.
I don't know how you made a Voth.
Using that armor only. That's the only way
just
it can't
had him
be
in
a
full
Voth.
armor.
Mm-hmm. Have him in full armor with the faceplate. You can't see in the faceplate, so that's how it works. I really wish they would add some of this more, some of the actual alien parts into the Alien Gen creator. I would love to see more parts in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one
in
of those
game and
things.
in the Foundry.
Well, I mean, like the Vadwar parts would be cool, but
Yeah.
someone has pointed out on a few occasions that certain NPCs that are apparently use the alien template have tails that are not of a variety used by any playable race option.
Well, there was occasions where there was a bug sometime that they used a bug in the
Yeah, I think there
costume
were a few people
creator
running them.
to create it. So that bug's been fixed now, so that if they change the uniforms, you can't have a towel again. But
the one I was specifically thinking of is a short pink tail that it looks almost reptilian. That
I'm not
some of the
sure what you're referring to.
Federation NPCs have.
Are you sure it just wasn't a recolored Cation tail?
Well, I mean, it's too short.
Well, you can control the length of the tail.
I mean, it's like half the length of a Cation tail.
Yeah, I mean, with a bug,
And
if
it's
the character
relatively
creates a
thick.
bug, you can actually really distort the size of the tail.
Well,
but
not
when I
to
talked
mention
about
that-
was not something I've ever seen on a player.
Well, Cryptic has a lot more command of that than we do. They have a lot more things to work with, and they can change anything and everything that they want to. We're limited. But in any case, we will have to wait to really see what we actually get. Hopefully, they will turn on Tribble before testing is over, so we can get in and confirm for everybody what is actually in there.
I mean, turn on the Foundry.
Yes, turn on the Foundry.
Definitely, and because we'll need to get in there and test to make sure no new bugs have cropped up, or if they have,
Which
what they are.
I'm sure there will be some.
You can always hope. I mean, there have been
always hope.
there have been some
Well,
updates that have been relatively minor. far as
Relatively,
bugs.
but you know, we still ended up with annoying things. I mean, we currently have a bug that hasn't been fixed and is making things difficult at the moment.
Well, at least Cryptic Frost now knows how to replicate that bug, or it is happening to him on his system in the live environment. So at least he knows about it, and that's a better step towards getting it fixed. But unfortunately, we haven't heard anything more on that recently, so no news there. So why don't we move it along to what we've been working on? Bazag, since you're our guest, have you been much in the Foundry lately?
I've been dabbling a bit. I've got this mission that I've been working on for 2 years, but haven't done hardly anything on it. And I've recently done some map work on it, and there's a YouTube video that I put up featuring some of the work I've been doing on it. it's I don't want to go into much of the details of the story, but yeah, it's an unusual piece of environment where, there's a surface bit, but I also want to go under the surface. So I wanted an exterior environment, but I also want to have an underground interior environment in the same, section. So that's been a bit of work to get right.
I imagine you're kind of
can you
building
tell
a
us-
cavern from scratch.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna ask
pretty
you
much.
how it worked.
Well, it, there was because I was building in a desert anyway. There was these really extra large rock platforms. XL02, I think, that was the one I particularly used, and just arranged that so that it formed an undulating, surface, but there was space that I could take, that I could also go underneath as well onto the actual proper floor of the map, where I could put everything that I wanted underground in. I can post a link to the video on.
Yeah, I can put it
If
in
you
the show
get,
notes.
just give me a moment. So that's been pretty much all I've been doing in the Foundry, but I've been doing a lot of writing outside of the Foundry and a few other things as well. That's pretty much it.
That's pretty much the only thing I've been doing as well, except for updating my various Starfleet Intelligence officers throughout my missions with the black stripe color scheme. So let's see, Mark, have you been in the Foundry much lately?
Not much. Unfortunately, the anniversary event in Champions Online has distracted me greatly.
There's lots of distracting things going on right now. We had that event over in Champions Online. We have the Crystal and Entity event, of course, in Stowe, and Greendragoon and I think, wasted much of a weekend recently on a double XP event in Lord of the Rings Online.
Yeah, finally got back into that game.
Yeah.
Not that I don't need more distractions.
Speaking of distractions, have you been distracted much from Part 2 lately?
I've been working on it a little bit. Life has been kind of busy. I mean, gaming aside, real life stuff has been happening. So I have been working on a little bit. I was working on some dialogue, basically working on trying to restructure some exposition. I'm trying to shift some of the exposition later in the mission, and so I was kind of restructuring that and paring it down a little bit. It's still a lot of exposition, but hopefully it'll be a little bit more manageable. Other than that,
sounds good.
Mapping stars in the Delta Quadrant.
So let's see. Anybody besides me have a mission review? So usually we talk about this before the show, but we were a little rushed for time when Dragoon got back, so I didn't ask anybody.
Don't have any right now.
Yeah, neither have I. I've been doing more Tribble than Foundry.
That's all right. So have a lot of people. Okay, that's good, because I do have a mission review, and actually it's going to dovetail into our next topic. So I played Explore Delta Volanis 4 by HelixFungus. This is the same author as I played one of his last week. So in this one, which is kind of meant to be similar to Kirkfat's small exploration missions, you're sent to explore a series of star systems. And here's one of the things where I have to praise the author. He didn't give you any info beyond that, which I think is great, because when you're doing an exploration mission, I mean, you want to be going into the unknown. You shouldn't have any information, or at least not much, before you go into the thing. So I thought that was a good touch. He had a very well done space map where you actually go to these three systems within the same space map. You do the thing where you warp to one, the planets spawn in, warp to the next one, those planets spawn out, new planets spawn in. The only advice I would have for him is that on this one is that all of his planets and all the objects were on one plane. They were all at just the 0 altitude. So vary that up a little bit. It makes it feel a little bit more natural. I mean, you can still have all of the objectives and all of the warp outs and warp ins on the same plane, but vary the objects and it makes it a little bit nicer. So you find a civilization on one of these systems, and you go to the next system. You also find one there, but that one's being poisoned by something in the atmosphere, radiation. So you actually beam down there, and you end up helping them, finding them a way to clean up this radiation using nanovs, because we know nanovs eat radiation. And you help them to bring the nanovs back to their world. So he had a neat concept, is that these two sort of primitive worlds, they're actually connected because they have this chariot, he calls it, which is a building that several of this alien species are able to transport essentially from one world to the other. And they've actually been using it to bring some of the refugees over to the non-poisoned world. One of the things I encountered there is that when you actually take a ride on this chariot from one world to the other, and when it arrives on the other world, there's a bunch of combat mobs outside with not really a lot of explanation to why they're there. There was some dialogue at the same time, but it made it hard to focus on the dialogue because there was a big fight going on. And so the explanation was probably in that dialogue, and I just missed it. So I just, maybe these guys didn't spawn at the right time. One of the things you always got to be aware of is timing, and you want to have some other people play your mission, make sure that timing is always working exactly the way you want it. Anytime you have dialogue, you want to give the player a chance to read it. You don't want to have combat mobs distracting them or making them not be able to read all the dialogue. Now, like with his previous mission, he's not a native English speaker, so there's a lot of errors and bad grammar and things like that. But because I know this about him, I didn't mark him down for that. The reason I marked him down a little bit, I called it a 3-star mission, is because of the Prime Directive. Now, he's gotten in touch with me and told me some things that actually had me get a little bit of a new perspective on it. I mean, just right before the show here. So, you end up helping these people, and you're not trying to disguise yourself in any way. So you essentially, in my mind, when I was playing through it, you just sort of wantonly violate the Prime Directive. You even have an admiral who comes on and tells you he's sort of declaring the Prime Directive invalid for this system, which I thought that that was just a horrible thing to do. But then the author gets a hold of me, which is great. I encourage people, if they see things in my review that they don't agree with or need clarification on, please get in touch with me. So he sends me an email, and in his mind, when he was writing this, this was not a pre-warp civilization in his mind, because they were able to travel between the two worlds. Is essentially, they were, in his mind, they were ready for contact with outsiders, with other races like the Federation. And so I was like, okay, given that, I can see helping these people maybe, even though you're still sort of interfering in the natural course of what's happening to them. But I think it would be a benefit for the mission to have that discussion, maybe among your bridge officers beforehand. Say, Captain, are these guys really a pre-warp civilization? What do you think? Can we do this? Can we make contact with them? I don't know. And have that conversation, then maybe have the captain come to a decision after that, to sort of draw attention to that. So I think it was a decent mission. I think it needs a little bit of work to flesh out that thing, but I wanted to expand this out to the rest of you guys, and let's figure, let's have a talk about the Prime Directive, and what do you guys think it means?
So there's very clearly the part about.
There's actually.
So it's very clear the part about the that pertains to pre-war civilizations, and that seems to be something along the line of they're not allowed to reveal themselves to any civilization that hasn't achieved warp drive. I mean the idea that the very presence of Starfleet could cause a shift in their progression. Now, beyond that, they're allowed to reveal themselves and make first contact. That said, in general, Starfleet has really kept a hands-off approach unless a couple of criteria occur, such as a request for asylum or for help. In general, they don't try not to start interfering if there isn't like a really good reason. Obviously, Kirk liked to go around and meddle all he wanted, and only brought up the Prime Directive when it was convenient. So,
oh yeah, I mean,
take it with a grain of salt.
All the time in the show was all about the times when we violated it, but I think, more often than not, we should be following it rather than violating it.
Yeah, it's generally a core principle. So, I mean, yeah, unless you've got a really good reason for breaking it, it gets a little murky as to whether or not it applies to post-warp civilizations. Mm-hmm. In general,
I think the principle is that you don't interfere in the natural development of another species.
Yeah, that's the basic core thing.
Yeah.
In terms of post-warp, it's been mentioned, I think it was on TNG during the Bajoran Cardassian War, while that was rounding up, that that there was, the Prime Directive basically said that it was an internal matter between the Cardassians and the Bajorans, that it wasn't a Federation matter, and so the Prime Directive basically forbade them to intervene in that situation because it's Cardassians and a colonized world rather than a dominated world rather than a really interstellar governments dealing with each other, in which the Federation could act like a mediator or some other.
Yeah, and in the case of the Bajorans, the Cardassians had already invaded by the time Starfleet really made contact with the Cardassians. So, I mean, what are they going to do? Tell them, hey, I'll invade this world that you got invaded before we even got here.
Well, and I mean, in that one, it was the Bajorans specifically asked for help, and it was actually sort of a prelude at the time to them joining the Federation. I mean, that was the whole reason that the Federation was going to be there, is to get them to join. I mean, it's pretty much spelled out to Sisko that was his mission there, by an admiral, I think, if I remember correctly. But they were a warp civilization, and it was known that they were because they had colonies elsewhere. Even before the Cardassians invaded.
Yeah, and even if they weren't, they were. I mean, the invasion of Cardassia pretty much blew any remnants of concerns about the Prime Directive out of the water.
I mean, the occupation was only 50 years long. So, I mean, before that, they had many, many years of being a warp-capable civilization.
Yeah. They definitely fall into several of the categories of people that the Federation would potentially offer assistance to, but
yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, because there are a long list of exceptions to the Prime Directive, and one of which that was actually brought up in TOS. I mean, one of the first mentions of the Prime Directive at all is if a third party has been meddling with the development of a pre-warp civilization. The Federation is authorized to take care of the problem.
I think you still have to minimize the damage that you might cause as well.
You want to avoid having them learn of the existence of alien races, but you want to stop the other race. However, a sub clause here is that if the Klingons were to go to a planet and openly tell the people who they are, blah, 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 it's a bit too late.
I think I've actually seen a Foundry mission where they did that. The Klingons.
I want to say somewhere at some point, Picard made the argument that the Prime Directive is not a hard and fast rule, that it's left open just a little bit to interpretation because it would be functionally useless as a hard and fast rule.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are so many special cases where the rule just isn't what is best for the situation or even for the people.
Yeah. A rigid set of laws is pretty much incapable of being used in society simply because it is physically impossible to anticipate everything that could possibly happen at some point in the future.
In fact,
are you referring to the horrible episode called Justice?
Yes, actually, I was just remembering that was the episode where he uses it. He defies the Prime Directive to rescue Wesley, which is actually a case where it does the Prime Directive does fall in with the non-interference of alien cultures, even though they were obviously already either warp capable or well aware of warp traveling species.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because as I was thinking about this topic, the thing that came to mind is actually Star Trek Into Darkness. And I know people like to say, "Oh, it's not Trek," they don't know any of the Trek principles and all that kind of stuff. But actually, I think it has one of the best understandings and explanations of the Prime Directive that I've seen in that scene with Marcus berating Kirk over his actions on the Nibiru homeworld. Because he says, he said, "What would you have done?" He said, "I wouldn't have put my first officer in jeopardy in the first place to try and, stop that volcano from erupting, because you're not supposed to alter a planet's destiny. That volcano is supposed to erupt. You have to let it erupt. You can't interfere." And they bust him for that.
Well,
no, not Marcus, Pike. Sorry. Pike was saying that.
Well, at one point in TNG, a similar situation came up where Worf's human, I'll call him brother because...
His foster brother.
Yeah, foster brother. That's the right word for it. Anyways, his foster brother had come up with some insidious plot to rescue a native species from their home planet, which was about to be destroyed, and relocate them to another similar but unoccupied planet nearby.
Well, there was also the episode with, I think it was Pen Pal, where you had Data making contact with the alien girl, despite the fact that she was from a pre-warp civilization.
Yeah, and that was another one where she contacted him, essentially. She sent out the transmission for anybody who was listening. And Picard rightly chastises Data for it, but says, that there always needs to be some flexibility for the situation.
Well, one thing that is an interesting clause in the Prime Directive is that anytime a race intentionally contacts the Federation, that changes the way the Prime Directive applies to them. Because, if a race is acting, is like the Bajorans were, intentionally asking the Federation for help, that changes the nature of the situation. Which is also what made the whole thing with the Federation deciding not to interfere in the Cardassian war with the Bajorans odd, because the Bajorans really were asking the Federation for help. I mean, if the Bajorans hadn't asked for help, it wouldn't be strange at all.
You know, I was talking to Kirkfat over dinner at STLV. I think, Baz, you were there. We were talking about the episode of Enterprise where they are trying to help a planet that has a medical crisis. And they have it's a two-species planet. And what it is essentially is the other species is immune, and it's asserting itself over the one. And Sir Boulevard says it's the genocide episode. That's essentially kind of what it is. And it sparks this debate over whether they should let it happen because that's what's naturally supposed to be happening, or whether they should give the other race the cure. And Kirkfat was horrified by that, and I'm saying, it's like, yeah, I mean, these are the experiences that led, if you read Federation the first 150 years, I mean, these are the kinds of experiences that led Captain Archer, who was later President Archer, I think, to develop the Prime Directive. I mean, everything has to have an origin. I mean, that's where it all comes from, is the experiences that Archer had, interfering sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally with other races. And interfering with the natural order.
Well, one thing that I've noted in however many years I've been pondering the Prime Directive is that one of the strangest invocations of the Prime Directive is in the TNG episode with the Ornarans and the Brekkians. Because the Brekkians had effectively enslaved the Ornaran people by coming up with this scam that convinced the Ornarans that they needed something that the Brekkians provided them in order to live.
The symbiosis.
Crusher figures out that the symbiosis, that one. Anyways, in the end, they realized that, the Ornarans are apparently never going to figure out for themselves what's going on. And according to the Prime Directive, they're not allowed to tell the Ornarans that they're being scammed by the Brekkians, which to me seems peculiar. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. In the end, Picard decides to invoke the Prime Directive as an explanation for why he's going to not help the Ornarans, which, as a result of his inaction, the Ornarans will not get their yearly supply of Felicium, and the entire population is going to go into drug withdrawal. And, hopefully in the near future realize that the whole Felicium thing was a scam, et cetera, and go back to being a functional civilization. The thing with that episode, though, is that looking at it from a certain point of view, it seems like that Picard was basically lying about his motives to the Ornarans and the Brekkians, is that he told them that he couldn't help them because their problem was an internal matter and that he was not allowed to interfere. But from another point of view, he's what's the word for it? He's neutralizing the interference of the Brekkians in the development of the Ornarans.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of he's obviously using a very specific interpretation. Obviously, he could have given them the warp coil. That wouldn't have been a violation of the Prime Directive, per se. But he's kind of choosing to very strictly adhere the Prime Directive and use it as an excuse to let things work out in the way he sees most favorable.
There are obviously many ways to interpret the Prime Directive, and discussing with Sir Boulevard in the chat room, I was saying, the idea with some of these episodes is, should you, the question being, should you interfere with what is naturally happening on this planet? And he says the counter argument is, will you let a people die when they're begging for help. And obviously, a lot of Starfleet captains have had trouble with that conundrum. And
Well,
I don't necessarily say there'd be a right answer to it.
It's part of why there's that clause with races that contact the Federation and ask for help, and how that's different from races that don't ask the Federation for help but need help anyway.
Yeah.
So I suppose another additional quirk thing to that was in pen pals. It was to anyone who was out there listening. Does that include the Federation? I mean, was that just a general broadcast to everyone count as asking for help, or is it just people who specifically called out the name of the Federation or other spacefaring nations out there that might, warp-capable nations out there that, might help?
Well, one interesting thing to note with pen pals is that apparently the person initiating the broadcast did not know of the existence of anyone who might be listening. She guessed that there was someone out there who could listen, which makes it different from someone, who's intentionally addressing the Federation, because in one case they know the Federation exists, in the other case they don't.
So while we don't have an exact copy of the Prime Directive and what it states, I think I'm going to bet you 10-1 it's written a lot like, say, the Constitution and Bill of Rights is for the United States, in that it's intentionally written vague to leave it very much open to interpretation. It's not meant as this absolute set of rules that every situation here is listed. It's this general principle on which decisions should be made.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
If I remember right, though, even with that in mind, it ended up being, by Janeway's time, a book, not just a sheet of paper with a few rules written on it.
They probably added a few things based on the experiences of our captains.
Honestly, from the way it was talked about in Voyager, I would guess that they added something once a year or more.
Oh, who knows? Maybe the first page is the Prime Directive, and then everything else is just addendums.
There's a whole subsection just entitled Janeway. under
and how
in
not
big
to be
letters
like.
What not to do. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, at some point, they came up with the Temporal Prime Directive.
Also true.
That was a future version of the Federation, though.
No, they had it in Voyager and Deep Space Nine.
It was mentioned several times, yeah.
Yeah, Janeway's forever quoting the Temporal Prime Directive. Now, it didn't show up before Deep Space Nine and the Trial and Tribulations. But yeah, clearly it's something that changes and evolves.
I guess I guess it's there to prevent captains from turning the time-space continuum into wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. I mean, the daily temporal fluxes are probably a bad thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's there to prevent alternate universes with good reason.
Basically, the both of them are essentially to prevent Starfleet captains from playing God, you might say. Don't alter the timeline for no reason, just because you want to. And don't interfere with other races just to interfere.
Let's go back and kill Hitler.
Well, as Command and Conquer Red Alert proved, that's a bad idea.
Well, how do you know that Hitler didn't die from future intervention?
We don't know, do we?
Actually, no one was ever able to figure out which of the many dozens of bodies they found in the rubble of that bunker was actually Hitler.
He wasn't there. He was taken to the future to stand
trial. From a certain
trial.
point of view, we're not 100% sure that Hitler died at the end of the suit.
In any case, why don't we move on to another topic? Let's talk about killing characters.
And specifically killing Foundry characters. Yes,
in the Foundry. This is something that we talked about a little bit on Tribble back and forth earlier today. Me, Dragoon, and Jan Darkrider, and a couple others.
I think it was Stow Admiral Aaron.
Yeah, Admiral Aaron. Because Jan Darkrider was writing a scene, I think, where one of the characters in Foundry mission was going to die and was having a tough time with it. So, I don't know, Dragoon, what were your thoughts on this one?
So, honestly, I mean, we were kind of talking about it, and I think the big thing it came down to was a needless or senseless death versus a meaningful death, and how you kind of achieve one or the other, or what one or the other is used for. Because, I mean, a senseless death is the easier, obviously, and also the one that can be done poorly, or more easily done poorly. And I mean, we can go through truck examples of that, like say Tasha and Jadzia, as both kind of being senseless deaths, and they were killed mostly because they quickly needed to be written out of the story. So it's generally not a great. It doesn't really work out very well when you're killing a character just to kill a character. That said,
which is all the rage these days.
Yeah, I think we were throwing debates about J.R.R. Martin, and Lost.
Yeah,
as shows that tend to kill characters flippantly. But I mean,
there's such a thing as there's shows that kill a lot of characters, but do it in a way that's not flippant, you might say.
Yeah, so I've been kind of trying to think of examples of characters that were not killed flippantly, or that had a meaningful death. I don't know. Has anyone here ever watched Farscape?
A few episodes.
Yeah,
I've seen the first season and then a few after that.
Oh, well, great. Now I can't even use the example without spoiling things.
Well,
throw up your spoiler warning.
The first example that comes to mind is the death of Kowalski in the first season of Stargate SG-1.
That was like the second episode, wasn't it? First or second?
Yeah, but the entire episode was essentially a lead up to his death. I mean, it was all about him in that episode. So I would say he wasn't killed off flippantly. And I think he was in part killed off to show how dangerous the world is that they live in.
Yeah.
Well, so that's what I was getting at, is that he was an example of something that was a truly meaningful death.
It's like a meaningful redshirt death.
And I mean, that's one of the things that you can do in your missions is to show that you're in a dangerous situation. You can kill off a character. I did that in Purity 6, where I have you choose a character to go on an away mission and they die. To show you that.
In Kowalski's case, he wasn't even a red shirt. He was actually the leader of the SG-2 team, I think. Or was it SG-3?
Yeah. No, it was SG-2.
Yeah, and he got a lot of screen time even for a character who's about to be killed off. So, I would say that's a very good example of a good character death.
Actually, Kowalski got so much screen time that he showed up in later episodes in some sort of alternate timeline.
Yeah, he definitely pulled a Tasha Yar. Several times.
See, I'm trying to think of a really good... now that you killed my Farscape example.
I think you can go ahead and say it. I mean, okay. That show's been off the air for a long time.
You know the character of Krace, Bylar Krace from Farscape? He's basically the villain through all of season 1. Kind of falls out of favor in season 2, and kind of goes through this whole character arc, redemptive character arc, and he dies at the end of season 3, but he dies in such a way that it's almost a capstone to his whole journey, because he dies in a case of ultimate self-sacrifice, to kind of bring the entire story that is up to that point to a close. And it's one of those things that, just because it's been building up for that for like 3 whole seasons, that it has such meaning, that it just seems like the perfect ending for his character.
They're talking in the chat room about the death of Tora Zial in DS9, and Pax says he was a bit upset, though it does set up nicely the whole Dukat Goes Insane arc. And I would argue that actually the whole character of Tora Zial is really just a part of Dukat's characterization, and including her death is especially, it's all about a reflection on his character. Rather than being entirely a character on her own.
I would almost say that,
like how Jake Sisko was there to build up Ben Sisko, the Sisko's character.
A little bit, but we had more time with him to actually become his own character, I think.
Well, I would say Zial is...
Jake had an interesting, from a certain point of view, corrupting influence on Nog, which made the character of Jake Sisko much more than just an aspect of Ben Sisko's personality.
I was going to say that I think Zial was a representation of the good in Dukat, so that when she died, so did any good or any redemptive quality that Dukat had. So in many ways, it's very much a symbolic death, and very much tied to the overarching story.
And funnily enough, it was also the beginning of Damar, his story of his redemption, essentially.
Yeah.
And which ended
with
his
another
death.
Great death.
Yes, which is one of my absolute favorite deaths of the series. Although I kind of wish he hadn't died, and it would be great to see him go on and be the leader of a free and peaceful Cardassia.
Yeah, but I don't know.
It was still a good death.
There's something poetic about Damar's ascent to martyrdom, is essentially what it is.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean that's a case of I think his death is better than his continued life would have been, at least as far as the story is concerned.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of, especially modern television, and this gets back to the whole J.R.R. Martin thing. A lot of television will kill characters specifically just for the shock value of it.
Absolutely.
And that's where you kind of run foul and get into the senseless death.
Like the infamous Red Wedding.
Really, I mean, I think the death has to serve the story. And it has to be integrated part of the story. I think.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that annoyed me most in TOS, is that why do the red shirts die? To add dramatic tension. Usually nothing more.
So I think if you're gonna kill off a character, you have to ask yourself, why are you killing off that character? What impact do you want it to have? Do you want it to have shock value? That can be a legitimate thing. If you want it to have shock value, you can do it that way. Do you want it to have a more emotional impact? Do you want the character to feel sad? Or do you want the player to feel sad that this character is dead? And if you do that, you have to make sure that you build that character up beforehand. They can't just be some random guy. You have to have lots of interaction with that character and make them sympathetic. Because then when you kill them, the player will be sad.
Yeah.
I've done something similar in one of my Foundry missions, Memory Lane. Well, so much the character that dies isn't actually the main character that you involve with, but it's more about him rather than how the effect of the character that died has on him rather than on you as the actual player. So there is always different directions you can take the deaths, whether but yeah, as you said, you got to the character that it's really about has been really is incorporated into the rest of the story, pretty much everything.
And as we've said many times, you got to think about who is the main character of the story, and that's the player. The player is always the main character. So your secondary characters have to have some kind of relationship with the main character, which is your captain, for their death to have any impact. So, I mean, you can't have somebody die who has no connection to the main character and expect it to have any impact. So if you're going to kill off somebody, you got to make sure that they're very integrated into the story, that the captain has a lot of interaction with them. And,
so,
yeah.
I would love to ask you guys, as a Foundry author or writer, have you ever set up a character that you planned to kill off but didn't have the heart to do it once the time came?
No.
Nope.
Not a lot of touchy characters, huh?
I've never.
You got to kill your dollar. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
the thing is, if you plan to kill them off, then you can always, you can prepare yourself for it. You know that you can do it, and thus, you can always approach writing them and doing all that, developing them, knowing that's going to happen. So there, not to reiterate the point, but yeah. Go on.
I have been kind of planning a certain aspect for Part 3 where there will be a choice the player will make, and depending on what choice they make, there will be consequences, including and potentially the death of one of the key players.
One of the things that I heard on Triple today was that one of the people we were talking to really, really appreciated being able to save the person instead of letting them die. And that is something that we can do some choices like that in the Foundry. Take some trigger work, some dialogue work, but this is something you can do. And something that I plan to do a little bit in one of my missions is that you're going to send some away teams to do something that's you're on a time limit, and the villain comes back and says, I'm going to detonate these bombs, or no, what is it? The villain says, I'm going to activate this thing, and in such and such seconds, and the guys say, well, we need more time, and you can either choose to save them or let some bombs go off and neutralize the villain, or beam them back to your ship and let the villain get away with it, essentially, to save your crew members. And try and give the player that choice, but there are going to be consequences either way. I think I explained that poorly, but I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it in game yet either. So,
yeah, I think the big problem I've been running into is obviously I'm going to have to set up this choice, and I want it to be somewhat more elaborate than just a dialogue choice. I mean, I want it to be a set of actions that you can choose to do. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I want the consequences to carry over into the next map, so that's going to be a really tricky thing.
Yep.
I'm thinking about doing something where at the end of the map where you make the choice, you're given a comm frequency to contact someone, and a different frequency will be given depending on which choice you make. So then they'll be asked for that comm frequency in the subsequent map.
Yeah. That's essentially how you have to do it if you want to carry triggers across maps. You have to ask the player to make that choice again, or to remember what choice they made. In some way,
Or
you can kind of disguise it, but that's what you have to do.
Who knows? Maybe in 2 years we'll have MacGuffins. That should be about how long it'll take Part 3 to be done.
Yeah, probably. All right. Let's see. Mark, you had another topic as well.
Oh, I was thinking about doing something related to talking about how you can tell a story without telling a story. I guess you'd say the best way to put this is how to structure the story so that the pieces of information you give the player create an adequate framework that they can fill in the gaps themselves, and you don't need to spell out all of the specifics of everything.
So you're saying something like maybe you're sent to survey a planet, but during the time you find all of these random pieces of evidence of something that happened there.
But you kind of leave it to the player to put that picture together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like one example. I mean, because
which could be good for exploration missions.
I recently rewatched a DVD that I had left in the box for a long time. And one of the things that struck me about the movie, its name is Big Wolf, in case you're wondering, was that the people who wrote the script for it, left giant chunks of the story completely, utterly unexplained. They were careful to choose the important parts and explain those so that people understood what was going on. And there's this huge thing that is just out there for the person watching to wonder about, even though, you know, certain other things. Actually, they don't really go into a whole lot of detail of explaining things in general. They just kind of like touch on the stuff that they felt was needed to explain the story. And in my opinion, they actually did that quite well.
Unfortunately, it's also
so more of a
right badly.
So, yeah, so more of a very Spartan, like not even explaining, just giving hints and suggestions so that the players can come up with their own ideas.
And in the case of this story, part of the reason why they did that is that the characters in the story don't have this information. I mean, because Earth is under attack by this alien race of unknown origin who claim to be the creators of the human race, and also claim that this war is actually being done for the specific reason that humans are not allowed to live outside Earth, and that they'll leave humans alone if humans go back to Earth and stay there. But, you know, aside from that, we don't know what the aliens are or what their true motives are, because it's entirely possible that the aliens are lying. And, I mean, because we don't actually see at any point in the movie any evidence of what the true alien life forms look like. Because we see things that look like they may possibly be the aliens, but they could also be some sort of biological constructs that the aliens use as living workers, because the first time we see one, it's in the context of piloting a fighter craft, which, you know, that sounds like something that you would have an actual person do, right? Then, you know, fighter craft crashes, gets captured, and does not do anything that you would remotely expect a normal person to do after being captured. Well, maybe a particularly obnoxious person, but anyways. But later on, we see several of them that are basically being stored on a rack in one of the alien ships that suddenly wake up when the heroes board the alien ship and fight the heroes. They were apparently literally hanging from a rack, doing absolutely nothing other than sleeping, apparently. So
I think this is something where you want to strike kind of a balance of not over-explaining things to the player, but giving them enough information that they can, that a smart person, because most gamers are fairly smart people, that a smart person can figure out what's going on. You don't have to always give them all the details. In fact, sometimes it's good that you don't, because you don't want the player to have access to details that the captain of their ship should not have access to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, because it's kind of like with what I was saying there is that the characters in the story don't know what the aliens are.
Yeah.
So the person watching the movie doesn't know what the aliens are either.
But one thing to complement this is that you could probably one thing that I see is that you can tell a story just by the environment that is around the player. Like I haven't played The Last of Us because I don't have a PlayStation, but apparently that has a lot of this kind of storytelling where there's, just by the assets in the room, by how things are structured, by what's in the room, you can have the ability to say, well, this was a child's bedroom that this happened in, and like someone was killed here, or that sort of thing, just by by putting the right assets in, setting the tone, putting blood smears or bodies, or just creating elements that aren't words in the environment, so that the players can who can look and notice can get that information from the environment rather than having to being told.
Showing rather than telling.
Yeah.
Which is always a good
It's kind of like the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
And the devil is in the details.
Absolutely. So, be very conscious of that when you're building your environments, is that, make the environment tell a story and help tell your story. All right, let's see. Anything anybody else wants to talk about tonight?
I don't think I've got anything to add.
I think we covered both the topics on mine.
Yeah, definitely.
Notes.
So I want to tell people to keep tuning in, because we're going to be changing things up a little bit in the coming weeks. We're going to do some special shows, including, we're planning one where we're going to talk about building custom maps, and we're going to not just talk about it, but show rather than tell. So, but for tonight, we will say good night or good morning.
Well, let's do the contact info.
Yep, contact info first. I'm forgetting my order of things.
All right. If you want to email us, we can be reached at foundryroundtable@live.com. We can also be found on Twitter at Foundry Roundtab. Drogan can be reached at Drogan1701. Markhawkman can be reached at MAR Hawkman. And I can be reached at Greendragoon.
And I can also be reached at Bazalonia, Bazalonia.
Said, is that a letter?
It's Commonwealth for Z.
Well, Canadians also do it that way.
I know, I'm just teasing Baz a little.
All right. So, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.